YouTube, welcome back to the channel. You're watching Gunplay TV, and today we are taking a look at a pistol from the likes of Smith and Wesson. Now this is the SD9 VE. Now this is a pistol that I've seen more and more people picking up. It's a relatively decent budget option, so we're going to take a look at what the features are and let you guys make a decision at the end as to whether or not this is worth the money. But before we go any further, I'm going to ask that you pause this video now, scroll down, take a look for that subscribe button, and once you've found it, go ahead and give that a click for me. I do appreciate it. Without further ado, let's get straight into the pistol.
Reach for the sky.
Now, before we go any further into looking at the Smith and Wesson SD9 VE, I want to make sure that I acknowledge that this is a safe firearm and we are in a controlled environment, okay? So the firearm is empty and of course, we have nothing in the chamber. So, of course, I've got my normal rundown that I typically go through with these comparisons, but I want to kind of give you guys a high-level breakdown of the SD9. All right, so taking a first look at the SD9, we can see right off the bat that, of course, we've got this nice two-tone coloration, but more importantly, I want to call out is the size and kind of where it fits in within maybe your pistol lineup, right, if you've got a few at home. It's going to kind of nestle itself between maybe that full-size, duty size option, right? Not a super long slide. I'd say that this is relatively akin to what you might get on the Glock 19. However, you do get a relatively full grip. Now, not a full-size grip, but we'll get into the magazine capacity here in a bit, but you will note that I do not have my pinky kind of hanging off like you might find with some of the subcompact options. The SIG P365, the Smith and Wesson Shield or Shield Plus, right? And so again, a relatively good carry size pistol, I think, is probably the appropriate nomenclature for this. Now, right off the bat, right, this is a pistol that you either have heard about or you haven't, right? It doesn't have a whole lot of frills, and so we'll run through some of the features. The first of which is going to be that two-tone kind of stainless on black design, right? Certainly a look, right? If you like it, you will be a fan of that. If not, then you might find yourself wanting to Cerakote or get a different color option. Now, of course, it is going to include a Picatinny rail, right? And so it's nice to see that. That is a regulation sized, if you will, Picatinny rail. So most of your weapon lights should fit on here, nothing proprietary like you might get with some of the subcompacts. Now, it is not an ambidextrous pistol. Of course, we do have our slide lock, slide release here on the left side of the firearm. So right-handed shooters rejoice, left-handed shooters, you'll have to make some accommodations there. Now, as I look at the magazine release, it does not appear also to be reversible. So again, more or less, like I said, a no frills pistol. This is going to suit your right-handed shooters just fine, but if you're one of the weirdos that's left-handed, then this may or may not be for you depending on your level of training and proficiency with the firearm. Aside from that, you are going to get a relatively nicely, I should say, checkered grip, and they've kind of varied that pattern, right? We've got something of a checkered pattern here in the back, whereas a more, maybe a more natural kind of, I like to say, palm print style pattern here on the sides. And it does provide a relatively good amount of purchase on your hand when holding it, right? You get a pretty good grip on something like this. It's not overly thick or oversized, and we'll take a look at the dimensions here in a bit. Aside from that, right, you are going to get the standard Smith and Wesson reliability, right? Typically, when you buy a Smith and Wesson, again, a made in America pistol, there's really not much to be desired as far as performance. Of course, this is not the top of the line, and it may not hold a candle to some of the newer options from Smith and Wesson, but certainly something that you can run with straight out of the box. And I'm seeing more and more people pick that up, I imagine, for that reason. Now, as we take a look at the way the pistol is equipped out of the box, the first thing that I want to note is sights, okay? And so the sights on this particular pistol are your standard white 3-dot arrangement, right? And so there is a boxed notch there in the back, 2 dots on either side, and then of course you are going to have the white front. Overall, not a whole lot to say about those. I will say that they do appear, as I look at them, to be polymer, which I'm not typically a fan of. At least here in the rear, they appear to be polymer. Now, as I look at the front, it's a bit harder to tell. But again, sights is something that I would always recommend upgrading on a pistol if it fits within your budget, right? Some things are gonna make or break your pistol. The sighting system, of course, is definitely advantageous to have, right? If you are going to shoot, it's good to be able to hit what it is that you're aiming at. And so the sighting system is going to be imperative towards that end. Now, I've not experienced any issues with these sights. I should say they have not shifted under recoil in my experience, and they have proven to hold up. So again, something that you can run straight out of the box, typical Smith and Wesson quality. Would have loved to see those made in metal, but hey, you kind of have to pick and choose when you're going within this this particular price range, which we will get to here at the end. Now, typically I would show takedown of the pistol. Now, that's something that YouTube has since come against us on, but I will say, if you are familiar with taking down the likes of a Glock or a SIG even for that matter, right, we do not have a takedown lever, but we do have takedown notches, and it's gonna work very similar to your Glock. I've got some previous videos where I actually did go through that, and so if you really like to see that, I'll reference that in the top right. But takedown is relatively straightforward, and I'll kind of break it down here off camera and show you guys some of the internal components. All right, so now that we've got this thing stripped down, again, didn't want to do that on camera for the sake of YouTube police, but you're going to kind of get what you would expect from a modern striker-fired pistol, very similar to the likes of a Glock, of course, with Smith and Wesson proprietary parts, right? And so, of course, within the frame, it is going to be a polymer frame, which again is going to lend itself to not necessarily the most rigidity when compared to an alloy, aluminum, maybe a steel frame, but it is going to provide that lightweight factor, right? And so for a firearm that you're going to potentially be carrying on the regular, that is something to consider. We'll get into the weight here in a bit, but I would like to point out that of course you are going to get that polymer frame. And one other thing that I kind of call out maybe as a feature is that, you know, they haven't gone so far as to add a gas pedal, but they do have kind of a serrated or textured portion here on either side of the firearm. So again, if you are left-handed, at least you do have something of a shelf for some purchase. And that's a bit, you know, kind of a divot there with some texture on it. So that does, of course, give you a bit of purchase when you're doing your thumbs forward grip. Now, aside from that, of course, you're gonna have your recoil spring and guide rod assembly there. Nothing much to look at in that regard. I wouldn't say that it's anything special. And of course, you are going to get a stainless steel barrel. Now, I do like the stainless steel look. Again, on this gun, it's kind of a two-tone. So if it's your thing, you'll certainly find this to be to your liking. But again, a relatively straightforward barrel, nice feed ramp there. And one other thing of note I would say is of course going to be the loaded chamber indicator there at the top. So that's going to allow you, when the firearm is of course completely assembled, to tell just by a glance looking down at the top of the firearm whether or not you have a live round in the chamber. So always nice to have that, an additional safety feature, even if the firearm itself does not feature a manual safety. And then lastly, of course, we've got the stainless steel kind of alloy looking slide, right? Smith and Wesson, Springfield, Massachusetts, printed there on the side, good old made in America quality. Really very little to be desired here. You are gonna have your forward and rear slide serrations, which of course is gonna be nice for those press checks and it's racking that gun and clearing any malfunctions. So again, you kind of know what you're getting when it comes to Smith and Wesson, but I did want to kind of give you guys a 360 around that slide and the firearm as it's broken down. So now that the firearm is reassembled, once more, of course, did not want to do that on camera for the sake of monetization. It's a shame that we have to jump through these hoops, but here we are. One thing that I do want to call out next is going to be the slide catch, slide release. Now, of course, this is a component on a firearm that you're going to find yourself interfacing with quite a bit, whether you're doing your dry fire, cleaning, clearing the weapon, and of course, dropping that slide home on a full mag. In this case, of course, we are still working in a controlled environment, so we won't have any live ammunition here. But of course, the slide catch, as I mentioned before, it's not ambidextrous, so that is a bit of a letdown. It's always nice to have that ambi control, whether or not you are left or right-handed. It's always nice to be able to kind of actuate the firearm and get it into battery if you're using your strong or support hand, right? So that's one thing I would have liked to see. I'm sure that there's probably a kit out there where somebody has added that, but it is not available out of the box. Aside from that though, it is steel. It's not a plastic component, of course, and it does have relatively good purchase, right? When putting that up, of course, it's relatively easy. It's a bit extended, which I do like, not really the shortest or stubbiest of slide releases. I will say though, it is relatively low profile. I'm not sure if you guys will be able to see that there, but it does not protrude much from the side of the firearm. However, I will say I've not found that to be an issue when utilizing it. Now we mentioned components that we are going to handle quite a bit. I would say that the one that you're going to use the most, of course, is going to be the grip. And so I want to cover grip and ergonomics with this particular pistol. Some of this we've already touched on, right, when I went through the high level features of the firearm, but I will say that it is relatively slim. Again, I would say that, of course, you kind of have a double stack magazine here, but it is by no means the chubbiest. I think it's a bit slimmer than the Glock 19, at least as far as the grip goes. And you're able to get a relatively good purchase just on the integrated beaver tail there in the back, right? So I haven't experienced any slide bite or anything of the sort with this particular firearm. The grip, of course, and as it points, is relatively good. It's got something of a low bore axis when compared to maybe your SIG P320s, and so it's going to be relatively pointable. If you've experienced and used Smith and Wesson pistols in the past, I think that the grip angle is pretty conducive to picking this thing up and running with it. Now again, when it comes to the grip, of course, we have to note on the texture, you do have the checkered here in the rear as well as in the front, and then kind of this fingerprint style texture here on the palm swells, which are, as we can see here, I hope it comes through on camera, a bit swollen to kind of fill your hand out a bit. The last thing, of course, that I've already touched on, but I did want to point out once more is, of course, going to be your gas pedal texturing. These are, in fact, divoted, and so you're able to get a little bit of purchase on that with your thumb's forward grip, and it's going to give you a little bit of downward pressure, of course. Something's always better than nothing. But aside from that, I would say the overall ergonomics on this thing are not bad at all. Again, a relatively slim pistol when compared to other, full size or compact carry size firearms. And I think that it's going to be a relatively good option if you're looking for something somewhat lightweight, not too chubby, that you can carry either at appendix or even at the hip. Now, one other component that I usually like to touch on, especially with these modern firearms, is modularity or adaptability, right? And that's typically something that you're going to see more and more of as new firearms are developed, right? The SIG P320, at least in my mind, really helped to kind of blaze this trail. Aside from the Glock 19, you get a wide variety of first or third party accessories to enhance the function or adapt the firearm to different use cases, whether that's a shoulder mounted brace or otherwise, right? Additional sight options and things of that nature. You're gonna have that option with a lot of these newer firearms. Now, one thing that I've noted about the SD9, while it does seem to be something that is in quite a few Americans' hands at this point, it does not seem to have the same level of aftermarket support, which is a bit of a letdown if that's something that you were looking at. Of course, you do have the options of potentially getting a slide cut, but that's not something that you will see listed on many websites and OEMs as far as compatibility, right? This firearm seems to kind of have escaped the mainstream, for lack of a better term. Furthermore, right, when looking for accessories, especially holsters for this particular firearm, I had quite a bit of a time. There weren't very many good ones out there. We found a kind of shitty one from Black Hawk, and if you want to see something of a decent option, feel free to check out the video on the top. I did get a few from Veteran, and we found one for this that I think is going to suit those of you who like to carry at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock, so check that out. Now, if you already do own a few M&Ps or other Smith & Wesson pistols, if I'm not mistaken, the Smith & Wesson M&P sights will, in fact, mount to this, and so there is a bit of saving grace in that regard. But as far as aftermarket support, modularity, it's not quite as good as it is with some of the newer pistols, even from Smith & Wesson. Now, moving on to capacity, right? It just so happens that this is a YouTube compliant magazine and firearm for that matter. The stock magazine on this firearm does not hold more than 15 rounds. And so again, a relatively competitive capacity from a carry size pistol, not the absolute best. Of course, we've seen smaller guns that hold close to as much, maybe with the adaptation of a different magazine or otherwise. However, as far as capacity, I mean, I think that anything 15 and up for a gun this size is relatively competitive, and so I'm happy to see that at least we're not kind of relegated to the tiny 10-round double stack that we see on some other pistols, right? So overall, not the greatest, but certainly not the worst. Now, the magazine is going to be steel, it appears, but one thing I will say about it is it's not painted, which means it should have good ability to drop free from the firearm, should remain relatively slick, especially after cleaning, and you shouldn't necessarily have any issues with getting that thing stuck in there with any grit that kind of piles up as you use the firearm. So let that say what it will. Now, of course, a key consideration for any carry firearm especially is going to be the weight. So I've got my scale here. We'll go ahead and plug this in, and we will weigh this firearm as it stands unloaded on an empty magazine. So let's go ahead and tear this. We'll put it to ounces. And again, just to verify that we are using a safe firearm on an empty mag, we'll go ahead and drop that on there. And it's gonna come in at 22.95 ounces. So certainly not bad. I'll convert that to pounds for those of you who are too lazy to do so yourself. And we'll go ahead and drop this back down. to come in at 1.43 pounds. So certainly not the heaviest firearm, also probably not the lightest, but overall I would say that this is a reasonably sized carry firearm, and the weight being a key consideration in that, I think, does not disappoint. Now, I certainly could not finish this review without talking about the trigger. Okay, and so this is kind of your old school Smith and Wesson M&P style trigger. And for those of you who know what that is, you probably already have an opinion as I begin to say that. Now, it is a hinged mechanism, right? And of course, that's going to have something of a trigger bar safety in there. I'm not sure if that'll show up on camera. But of course, if you don't actually pull that hinge back in that trigger, you're not going to be able to break it and send a shot outward of the barrel. Now it is going to have a bit of play, right? A little bit of take up. Part of that being inherent to the trigger bar safety or the hinged safety design that they've got in this particular pistol. But once you kind of get past that take up, I say that there is a relatively defined wall. A little bit of creep. Quite a bit of creep. And then that trigger breaks. Now, I've got to be honest, certainly not an impressive trigger out of the box, and this is where that aftermarket support really comes in. Can you find a better trigger for this? Absolutely. Would I recommend it? Undoubtedly. It's definitely not the best trigger. As I go ahead and do that once more, you're gonna have quite a defined wall after the take up, but it's gonna creep just a bit, quite a bit again, as I should say, before that trigger finally breaks. Now, I'm trying to do that as slow as possible so that that's visible on camera, but there is quite a significant pull, and I would say that that pull weight is certainly, I'd have to say, around 5 pounds, if not more. I'll see if I can find the actual specs online and throw those up for you guys, but yeah, I'm definitely not impressed with this trigger. And if you got one of these, I certainly would recommend replacing it. However, a trigger that works is certainly still a trigger, so there's that. Now, for me, this is probably one of the primary considerations, and I imagine for a lot of you as well. It's going to be the looks and the aesthetics of the pistol itself. Now, as I hold it in the light here, right, the two-tone really does look good. Again, if that is your thing, I imagine this thing would look pretty slick with a red dot mounted up top, an upgraded trigger, and maybe a Surefire on the front. Again, as we've got it, you know, it's pretty stripped down, but I imagine this pistol, of course, could be well equipped if in the hands of the right owner. I'd also like to see maybe some different grip or frame options from Smith and Wesson. Again, this is not very flattering. It's certainly, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, it's no frills. It's going to get the job done. The texturing is there. It's not bad, but it's not beautiful at the same time, right? Now, I think that the best part about this firearm, at least in my mind, is going to be the slide. It's well serrated. Again, it's nothing too crazy, but I like a nice, simple slide. And it kind of gives me vibes of the M&P series, right? And so if you like those slides, this looks, at least in my mind, very similar to that design language. But overall, right, I mean, the aesthetics on this thing, certainly not the best, right? It's not the chunkiest pistol, not the beefiest option, but again, you know, for what you're paying for, it's definitely not bad, just not the prettiest, right? And so, of course, looks, aesthetics, always going to be a subjective topic, and so I'll allow you guys to form your own opinion. If you disagree, go down in the comments and tell me I'm stupid. But I do not think that this thing is gorgeous, but the two-tone is nice. Now, of course, the most important consideration, especially in this inflated economy, is going to be the price. What's the price? What's the price? Now, for a 9mm striker fire pistol from a well-reputed company such as Smith and Wesson, I don't think that you're going to be able to get much better than this for the price. Now, these, of course, I imagine MSRP is quite a bit higher, but as I've scanned the internet right now, these can be had as low as $270, and I would say that they probably float around $315 to $350 street price. Now, that again is pretty competitive. I think that the only thing that kind of falls within that price range are the Tauruses, and you know, many of you know how we feel about Taurus as a brand. Not to say that they're bad, they certainly have improved, but if given the choice, I certainly would go Smith and Wesson over Taurus any day. Now, that price, again, extremely low. I mean, I've purchased weapon lights that cost more than this firearm, so let that say what it will. I wouldn't expect, again, cutting edge performance out of this, and that's probably where some of the corners were cut, right? Not the most compelling design. Certainly potentially a trigger that needs some work, and then you don't have a lot of the ambi features that you might otherwise have come to appreciate out there on the market, right? Again, out of the box, it's no frills, but it's gonna get the job done, and it's a Smith and Wesson, so you can rest easy about that, at least at the end of the day. So in conclusion, right, the Smith and Wesson SD9 VE, two-tone, kind of stainless on black, striker fire 9mm from Smith and Wesson. The theme of the day here is no frills, right? You get what you pay for, which in this case is probably no more than $350. And for that reason, right, it's not going to be the fanciest, most cutting edge option, even compared to other Smith and Wesson in-house options like the M&P, the shields, so on and so forth. But again, you get a 15-round capacity. You've got, your gas pedal serrations here on the frame itself. You've got slide serrations on the slide. And then of course you've got some options, at least when it comes to M&P sights, for upgrading your irons. But out of the box, again, this is a relatively decent platform if you want to start cheap and build out. For me, I would certainly recommend adding a few things to this, starting with a new trigger. I then would probably consider some new sights and potentially an optic cut, right? And so those sights, of course, probably need to be suppressor height in that instance. And then if I could, I would go so far as to get this frame stippled just to kind of give it a better look, right? Not to say that it's ugly, but it certainly isn't flattering. Right, maybe slap a Surefire X300 Turbo or Ultra up front. Again, if you haven't seen the video on the Surefire Turbo, check out the video in the top. But again, all in all, certainly a decent option for what you're paying. But I would say that this certainly sits and nestles nicely within the budget tier of striker fire 9mm, right? It's gonna be hard to find something from a well-reputed brand like Smith and Wesson that's gonna come in cheaper than this, right? Now, again, you can certainly go with Taurus, but I certainly would not be that guy. So the Smith and Wesson SD9 VE. You guys go down in the comments and let me know what you think about this one. Now, of course, if you've made it this far in the video and somehow have not already hit the subscribe button, I'm gonna ask that you go ahead and do that now. And leave a like while you're at it, because it really does help to push these videos through the algorithm. With all that being said, I'm gone.